Aiyana Brooks sat trembling in the school auditorium, her hands clutching a folder no one believed was real. Minutes ago, her name was erased from the valedictorian list, replaced by a white student with lower grades. The principal said it was a clerical error, but inside that folder was proof it wasn't. And as she stepped toward the mic, the fire alarm suddenly blared. Who pulled it and why? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun slanted low over oak-lined streets in the small Louisiana town of Brookhaven, casting long shadows through the frosted windows of Marston Preparatory. Inside a brick and ivy building designed to echo the grandeur of elite colleges, 17-year-old Aiyana Brooks sat at her desk near the back of room 204, her pen poised above a blank page. Her spine was straight, shoulders steady, but her heart beat fast, not from nervousness, but from the uneasy awareness that she was alone in more ways than most. Marston Prep had long been a place where heritage and legacy mattered more than merit. Nearly every student in that class wore tailored uniforms, spoke with carefully cultivated accents, and carried last names tethered to property deeds, old money, and influential alumni networks. Aiyana's uniform was crisp and immaculate, but to the others it was always just off. A little too clean, her shoes a little too scuffed, her backpack rather than a leather satchel. None of it mattered. What mattered was that she, black, ambitious, precise, had earned a seat there only through her own brilliance. As the teacher, Mrs. Carlyle, paced at the front, Aiyana scanned the room. She recognized some of her peers from football games, country club fundraisers, grandiose vacations to Europe. Their glances slid over her like she was a smudge on the window, visible, but unworthy of recognition. Behind polite smiles, there was calculation, a thin current of resentment they tried hard to hide. She often heard them whisper, under their breath, the token girl, the scholarship kid. Yet in the rare moments Mrs. Carlyle praised her in class, the words were unmistakable. Aiyana, your insight on Chaucer is remarkable. Or, your analytical essay on the Civil Rights Act shows depth beyond your years. On paper she was celebrated. In person she was tolerated. On this chilly autumn morning, a hush fell over the room. The chalkboards were wiped clean. The usual smell of chalk dust lingered faintly in the air. Aiyana closed her eyes for a second, inhaling deeply, gathering herself for whatever lay ahead. Today was different. Today, representatives from an outreach program associated with the venerable University of Oxford would visit their first appearance at Marston in over a decade. The school had announced it with fanfare, dangling the possibility of scholarships and international prestige. For Aiyana, it was lightning in a bottle, a chance to prove she belonged. When the door clicked open, the students turned forward. Heads rose. A hush spread. Thick as fog, through the doorway stepped a tall, thin man, mid-40s perhaps, with a navy blazer, a neatly pressed tie, and eyes so cold they felt like frostbite. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace. The room fell silent. There was something in the way he surveyed the students, meticulous, detached. As his gaze swept across pale faces, he paused, then skipped. The silences stretched. Finally, it landed on Aiyana. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to blur. The tutor's eyes were on her, not with curiosity, but calculation. He tilted his head slightly, tracing the curve of her jaw, the neatness of her uniform, the tension in her posture. A silent assessment. The kind of look meant not for praise, but for weighing value. Aiyana shuffled in her seat, her palms pressed against the wood of her desk, grounding her, reminding herself of who she was. She had read every book, solved every problem, stayed up late, writing essays illuminated by a single lamp. She had done that not to earn adoration from strangers, but to honor a promise she made to herself, to rise. When Mrs. Carlyle introduced the visitor as Dr. Malcolm Penrose, a distinguished scholar from Oxford, she said, a ripple of subdued excitement passed through the classroom. A few students exchanged polite nods. Aiyana forced a tight smile, even as her chest tightened. Malcolm offered his hand, languid, confident. Aiyana shook it, letting her fingers rest firmly around his. The handshake ended, and the tutor surveyed the room again. His gaze lingered, then he looked back at Aiyana. A flicker of a smirk touched the corner of his lips. The smirk was subtle, almost courtesy, but in that small gesture lay contempt. Not open hatred, no slur, no raised voice. That would have been too easy. Instead, it was a silent claim. You are here on borrowed merit. Remember that. The bell rang, signaling the start of class. Textbooks fluttered shut. Pens clicked on paper. But Aiyana's hand hovered, unmoving. She felt, rather than heard, the eyes, sharpened, hungry, tracking her every motion. As Dr. Penrose began to speak, his voice smooth, cultured, careful, the contrast became stark. He praised the school for its diverse and promising talent, using language that rang false, as though rehearsed. Aiyana heard the undercurrent, not talent, but tokens, not promise, but potential PR. He spoke of a challenge he would bring, one that would test intellect, character, and excellence. Students shifted in seats, a low hum of anticipation buzzing like static. Aiyana's pulse quickened. She caught herself smiling. She had longed for this moment, but as she glanced around, she sensed the weight of expectation and calculation pressing on her shoulders. For some peers, this was opportunity. For others, it was a threat. Aiyana could almost sense the corners of mouths tightening behind polite facades. She wondered how many already dismissed her. In their minds, not by chance, but by design. Mrs. Carlyle handed out papers. On each was a challenge, simple on the surface, an essay prompt, a logic puzzle, a small mathematical proof. For most it looked like a test, a stepping stone. But when Aiyana scanned hers, something set her teeth on edge. The prompt was loaded, ambiguous in tone. It seemed almost purposefully obtuse. Inside, several of her classmates exchanged puzzled glances, whispered words, odd, weird, obscure, but no one spoke aloud. Not yet. Aiyana's breath caught, but she didn't pull back. She had prepared her whole life for this. Across the room, a girl named Lorraine, silver-haired, prom and impeccably dressed, shifted in her seat. She looked at Aiyana for a moment, then away. The air between them felt colder than it should, as though a silent wall had risen. Aiyana settled into the task, pen trembling slightly, then flowing over the paper as her mind raced. Outside the window, the autumn leaves fluttered, crisp in their decay. Inside, the classroom held its breath. The tutor watched, the teacher watched, and the students, some with curiosity, some with silent scorn, waited. Aiyana's words came steady, fierce underneath the calm. She outlined assumptions, questioned premises, deconstructed each vague clause with surgical precision. Where others might falter, she saw through the haze. Where others wrote sentences, she built arguments. Her essay became less about answering the prompt, and more about exposing it. Glances flickered across the room like sparks. Lorraine's pen scratched hesitantly. Others murmured confusion, frustration. But Aiyana worked in silence. Sweat beaded just under her hairline. But her features remained composed, determined. She knew this moment could define her future. But more than that, she felt a deep, pulsing need to claim truth. When the time was up and papers collected, the class released a collective sigh. Pens dropped, notebooks shut. But the silence that followed was heavy. Not relief, but discomfort. Something unsettled, as though a mask had slipped. Malcolm Penrose picked up Aiyana's paper last. He studied it, fingers sliding beneath the edge, eyes narrowing. The room felt colder in that moment. The walls closer, the air thick. After a long, heavy pause, he nodded, politely, not with praise, with something else, something unreadable. Mrs. Carlyle thanked him gently, gathering the papers. Students pushed chairs back, bags slid forward. Aiyana stood slowly, spine straight as always. She gathered her books, but her arms felt heavier than the textbooks she carried. She looked around. Faces avoided her own. Mumblings of weird overqualified, show-off. Nothing loud, nothing that could be pinned, just air, oppressive, thick, and suffocating. As she stepped toward the door, Lorraine brushed past, too close. Aiyana felt the subtle scrape of fabric against fabric. Accidental, maybe. But Lorraine looked back, eyes hard, and pressed a smirk that faded into a blank stare. Aiyana didn't answer. She kept walking. In her head, a quiet voice whispered, "This is just the beginning." Outside, the corridor felt different, colder, empty of warmth. Lockers lined both sides, their metal doors glossy, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Students filed past her, laughter rattling softly, distant conversations humming like bees. Aiyana passed unnoticed, invisible among the crowds. She reached her locker and slid her key in. In the echo of the hallway, the door clicked open. She placed her books gently inside, and paused. Behind her, the door to room 204 opened again. Dr. Penrose stepped out, his figure framed in the doorway. He closed the door softly, and turned. Their eyes met. No words passed. The hallway stretched long and silent. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. Not approval, not respect, recognition. A recognition of something more dangerous than praise. Then he smiled. A small, subtle twist of lips. Not friendly, not supportive, calculated. And in that smile, Aiyana felt the weight of every possibility. She held in her hand the empty locker door. Her heart pounded. A swirl of dread and defiance settled in her chest, as though at that very moment, she both belonged and didn't belong. She closed the locker, slung her bag over her shoulder, walked away. Behind her, the footsteps in the corridor slowed, just a little, and then stopped. As the Oxford tutor left the building, his smirk lingered in the air, like a question. What will you do now? The hallway outside room 204 still hummed faintly with the echoes of shuffling feet when Aiyana stepped into the late morning light. The polished floors caught the glare, scattering it across the walls like a spotlight following her every move. Her grip tightened around the straps of her backpack as she walked, feeling the subtle shift in the building's energy since Dr. Malcolm Penrose's arrival. Something about him clung to the air, not just the refined accent or the crisp navy suit, but a heaviness, a quiet scrutiny that made the space feel smaller than before. As she headed toward the library for her independent study period, she sensed movement behind her, light footfalls, the hush of polished shoes gliding over linoleum. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. She could feel the presence, precise and intentional, stopping just a few steps short of her. Aiyana Brooks, his voice deep, cultured, unmistakable, slid into the hushed hallway, like a blade cutting into silk. She turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral. Yes, sir? Dr. Penrose offered a courteous smile that looked perfectly shaped yet hollow. Would you walk with me for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss. Privately. Students passing by glanced their way, some with curiosity, others with smirking satisfaction, as if they already knew what this meant. Aiyana gave a small nod, following him through the winding corridor, until they reached an unused study room, with a glass wall facing the courtyard. The room felt colder than the rest of the building, shadows stretching long across the floor. He pushed the door open, gesturing. After you. Aiyana stepped inside, steadying her breath. Her nerves tightened, but her expression remained composed. Penrose closed the door gently behind them. I read your response to my prompt, he began, sliding his hands into his pockets. A fascinating interpretation. Thank you, she replied, though uncertainty prickled at her skin. I tried to be thorough. Thorough, he echoed, pacing slowly. A rare trait among students your age. He paused. Especially considering your background. The word hung in the air like smoke. Aiyana's jaw tightened. I'm not sure what you mean by that. You come from a demographic that typically prioritizes emotional expression over analytical rigor, he said, tone smooth. Almost pleasant. So your essay surprised me. It was unusually articulate. She blinked slowly. Unusually? Uncommon is perhaps the better term, he said. The compliment, if it could be called that, sank like a stone. She recognized the tone. She had heard it in parent-teacher conferences, in scholarship evaluations, even in passing conversations at school events. An edge of disbelief, a tone that said you're impressive. For someone like you. She folded her hands in front of her. We wanted to talk about something. Yes. Penrose reached into his satchel, pulled out a thin booklet of paper, and placed it on the table between them. A challenge, one reserved for the most promising students. He tapped the top page. This is a theoretical problem, considered unsolved. I've brought it across the country to identify which students show genuine potential. Aiyana stepped closer. What kind of challenge? A combined logic-linguistic deconstruction. Some of the brightest minds in our program have attempted it, but never reached a satisfactory conclusion. He said it with theatrical weight, letting the statement linger like an invitation wrapped in mystery. She studied the first page. The prompt looked deceptively simple. A short paragraph describing a riddle involving shifting variables, abstract rules, and contradictory constraints. But the more she scanned it, the stranger it felt. The language seemed intentionally murky, terms with no agreed definitions, symbols that shifted meaning mid-sentence, and a concluding question that contradicted its own premise. Is something wrong? Penrose asked, watching her closely. It's unconventional, she said. His smile grew more distinct, though still cool. I thought you might appreciate a challenge unlike the typical high school exercise. You strike me as someone who likes to prove herself. Aiyana swallowed slowly. I just like to learn. Of course. He clasped his hands behind his back. Take it home. Work on it. Impress me. His words carried a subtle sting. A public test disguised as a private opportunity. A chance to perform, not excel. You're giving this to other students too? She asked. Penrose paused. Only the ones who show potential. Potential. The same word Mrs. Carlyle used when talking about her, always with the slightest upward inflection. Potential meant unfinished. It meant not quite enough yet. She slid the papers into her folder. I'll do my best. I expect nothing less, he replied. But the final look he gave her, that same smirk she'd seen earlier, told her the truth. He expected her to fail. By lunch, the challenge weighed on Aiyana, like an anchor tucked deep inside her backpack. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation, but pockets of silence formed as she passed. Lorraine and her circle whispered openly now, their eyes flicking upward, smirks ready to bloom. Do you think he gave it to her because he felt sorry for her? One girl murmured. Maybe he wanted to see how far she'd get before she broke, another replied. Aiyana kept walking, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, her stomach twisted. She forced down 2 bites of her lunch before sliding the tray aside. Her appetite had vanished. In the afternoon, during study hall, she found an empty table in the far corner of the library. The golden glow from the high windows fell across her papers as she unfolded the first page again. The problem pulled her in like a black hole, compelling yet unsettling. Sentences contradicted themselves. Variables looped into impossible patterns. It felt almost like a philosophical maze with no boundaries, no rules, no real intention of leading anywhere. Still, she pushed forward. Her pen scratched the paper. As she began to outline each assumption she could identify, she attempted to construct a framework, labeling each part, but every step led to a dead end. Each contradiction made the structure collapse. After 20 minutes, her fingers tightened around the pen, until her knuckles whitened. This doesn't make sense, she muttered under her breath. A passing classmate slowed briefly, laughed under his breath, then kept walking. The subtle mockery pricked her like a needle. By the 3rd hour, her notes filled multiple pages. Arrows crossed out lines, rewritten premises, footnotes questioning the nature of the prompt itself. The deeper she went, the more she realized the problem wasn't just difficult. It was flawed, deliberately so. Her heart sank slowly, like a stone being lowered into still water. She had seen trick questions before, but this was different. This wasn't about intelligence. It was about misdirection, presenting a puzzle that appeared solvable, but was engineered to collapse. A trap. Constructed with intention. She sat back in her chair, jaw clenching. Why would he give this to me? The answer formed before she finished the thought. Because he didn't believe she would see through it. Because he didn't think she belonged on the same intellectual field. Because he assumed she'd chase the solution blindly. Exhaust herself. Then hand him her failure. A heat rose in her chest. Not panic, but something sharper. A silent, simmering anger. Still, she wasn't ready to accept defeat. She flipped the page again, squinting at the line where the contradictions sharpened. If the problem was designed to mislead, maybe the real solution wasn't solving it at all. Maybe it was exposing the deception at its core. Her mind ignited with a fierce clarity. She worked for another hour, this time deconstructing the problem, instead of answering it. Her pen moved fast, not tracing a path to an answer but unraveling the illusion. She began mapping out every contradiction, forming an argument that the task itself was built on false premises. The library clock ticked quietly overhead. She barely noticed the fading sunlight. Time spilled forward, absorbed by her focus. When the final bell rang, the library emptied slowly. Lights dimmed. Aiyana barely lifted her head until a custodian announced closing time. She gathered her papers, but her hands were trembling slightly. Not from exhaustion, from recognition. This was no academic exercise. This was a test shaped by prejudice. As she walked home along the cracked sidewalk, her shoulder tense under the weight of her bag, the challenge seemed to whisper at her from inside her folder. Hours later, sitting at her kitchen table with a dim lamp casting a soft glow across her work, she reread everything she had written. The margins were full of questions, arrows, loops, counter-arguments, but within the chaos was certainty. She whispered it aloud, the truth sharpening her voice. "This isn't a problem," she said, staring at the page. "It's a message." And just as the words left her mouth, her phone buzzed with an unknown number lighting the screen. A new message. One that would change everything. Aiyana stared at the problem for hours, then looked up and whispered to herself, "This isn't a problem, it's a message." The silence in the library wasn't the kind that soothed. It was the kind that settled around Aiyana, like wet cement. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard the next morning, scrolling through the document she had spent most of the night constructing. A dense breakdown of Dr. Penrose's so-called unsolved problem. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours, but fatigue wasn't what dragged on her shoulders now. It was the sense of exposure, that invisible alarm going off in her chest, warning her that she'd stepped outside the boundaries people had quietly drawn for her. She didn't care. Not really. Not in the way they hoped she would. Her eyes stayed sharp, her hands steady. Still, she knew the rules of this game were shifting, and not in her favor. By second period, she felt the difference. People stared longer, whispered more deliberately. A few even smiled, not kindly, but with that same strained politeness Dr. Penrose had perfected. It was the kind of smile that said, "You should have stayed quiet." The first open shift came during literature. Mrs. Carlyle, once her fiercest advocate, barely acknowledged her when she raised her hand. When Aiyana gave a sharp observation about the racial subtext in The Great Gatsby, the room tensed. Miss Carlyle let the comment hang in the air, then pivoted to a different student without so much as a nod. That had never happened before. After class, Aiyana waited by her desk, hoping for a quick word. But Mrs. Carlyle simply gathered her papers with tight, mechanical movements. "Do you have a moment?" Aiyana asked softly. The teacher paused, eyes flicking up. "Of course," she said, but her tone had changed, clipped, reserved. "I've been working on that Oxford challenge." Aiyana began, choosing her words carefully. "And I noticed a pattern in the framing." Mrs. Carlyle cut in. "Aiyana, maybe don't overanalyze everything. Sometimes things are just what they are." The words landed like a slap. Aiyana blinked. "But this problem, it's built on contradictions. It's not even mathematically coherent." Mrs. Carlyle's lips thinned. "Maybe that says more about your approach than the problem itself." For a moment, Aiyana couldn't breathe. It wasn't what was said. It was what wasn't. That unspoken shift from supporter to skeptic. That subtle withdrawal of belief. And it was only beginning. By lunch, the temperature had dropped further, literally and metaphorically. She walked into the cafeteria and felt eyes trailing her before she even reached her seat. A group of juniors at the far end snickered as she passed, their conversation dipping just low enough to be unmistakable in tone, but hard to quote. The table where she usually sat, where she had once laughed, shared fries, reviewed notes with classmates, was already half filled. But when she approached, one of the girls slid her bag into the open seat. "Oh, sorry," she said with an exaggerated shrug. "Saving this for someone." Aiyana didn't argue. She turned quietly and walked toward the back, settling at a small two-top by the vending machines, alone, fork in hand, but appetite gone. Across the room, Lorraine laughed loudly, then made deliberate eye contact before nudging her friend and muttering something. Aiyana looked away, her palms felt cold, despite the room's heat. That night her inbox dinged. At first she thought it was another scholarship notification or university email, but it was anonymous. No subject, just a plain line of text. "You're embarrassing yourself. Quit." She stared at it, heart thudding, stomach hollowing. The cursor blinked beside the message like a dare. She didn't delete it. She read it again. Then again. The next morning, her worst suspicion was confirmed. Someone had leaked the Oxford problem. It had started as a small Reddit thread titled "High School Student Tries to Solve Fake Oxford Challenge." Then it ballooned. Screenshots of the problem were posted with sarcastic captions. Comments flooded in, some curious, others mocking. One popular reply read, "So she thinks she's smarter than Oxford now. Typical overconfident, woke energy." Then came the memes. One showed a stock photo of a black girl squinting at math equations with the caption, "When you think racism is why you can't do algebra." Another added her edited photo beside Einstein, with the words "Black girl genius, says problem is racist, still gets it wrong." She scrolled in silence, her face flushed but expression blank. The air around her computer screen felt electric, charged with shame, disbelief, fury. The comments weren't just dismissive, they were deliberate attacks. She's what happens when affirmative action goes too far. Let's be honest, she got into that school because she checks a box, trying too hard to play genius. Embarrassing. The words etched into her brain, each more precise than the last. She logged off, not to escape, but to protect what was left of her clarity. The following day at school was unbearable. The stairs were longer now, bolder. Her locker had been scribbled on in red marker. Genius, huh? She scrubbed it off with a tissue. Quietly. Nobody helped. Nobody even looked guilty. In the hallway, someone bumped her shoulder too hard to be accidental. "Oh, my bad," the boy muttered, not stopping. She said nothing, kept walking. When she reached her math class, she found a sticky note on her desk. No name, just one word: try hard. She crumpled it in her palm, but her hand shook as she did. She turned toward the window, blinking quickly, refusing to let the tears win. Still, she didn't crumble. Not fully. She sat in class, took notes, replied to questions. Her voice never cracked. But inside, a war was building. Not of doubt, of resolve. That evening, while working through her dissection of the challenge, she noticed something. A strange watermark on the bottom of the second page. Faint, almost invisible. She held the paper up to the light. Her breath caught. It wasn't from Oxford. It was from a state university in California. A lab no longer operational. A quick search revealed the watermark's origin. A discontinued research institute that had once tested AI-generated logic patterns for their complexity. And suddenly, it hit her. The challenge wasn't written by Penrose. He'd repurposed it from a known flawed model. He gave her a broken problem, not to see if she could solve it, but to watch her drown in it. Aiyana felt her blood freeze. He hadn't underestimated her. He'd wanted her to fail. And the school? They were complicit, maybe not in design, but in silence. She printed the watermark, the metadata, and her findings. She stared at them, heart racing. Her mind was already outlining her next move. But before she could finish her notes, her phone buzzed again. Another email. Same anonymous source. This time, 2 lines. You were never supposed to figure it out. That wasn't the plan. Back off, before you make it worse for yourself. Aiyana read it, and smiled. Not because it was funny. Because now, finally, she was sure. She wasn't paranoid. She was right. That night, Aiyana received an anonymous email, with a single line: "You're embarrassing yourself. Quit." The glow of Aiyana's laptop screen had barely faded from her eyes when she stepped into the dim hallway of her home. The anonymous email, "You were never supposed to figure it out," pulsed through her veins like static. Every breath she took felt tight, sharp at the edges. She walked toward the living room, where soft lamplight spilled across the walls and faint jazz crackled from the old radio her grandfather always kept running. Ellis Brooks sat in his armchair, the leather worn smooth from decades of use. He looked up when she entered, his eyes warm but perceptive, the kind of gaze that saw past silence, straight into the things you didn't want to say. "You're up late," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. His voice was gravelly but soothing, thick with the cadence of long-lived wisdom. "School trouble?" Aiyana tried to answer but felt her throat tighten. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down slowly. "Granddad." Something happened. She swallowed. Actually, a lot happened. Ellis turned the radio down, leaning forward. "Tell me." She didn't know where to begin. The challenge, the contradictions, the leaking of the problem online, the subtle hostility in the halls, the sticky notes, the whispers, the mocking videos people had posted, and worst of all, the email. Someone watching her progress closely enough to know what she discovered. As she spoke, Ellis said nothing. He only nodded occasionally, expression tightening with each detail. When she finished, the room went still. The air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the weight of her experience. "So that's why," he whispered. "That explains why you've looked like you're carrying bricks on your shoulders these past days." "I'm fine," she lied softly. "No, honey, you're not." He exhaled deeply, and leaned back in his chair. "And you shouldn't have to be." Her eyes stung involuntarily. But before she could respond, Ellis stood slowly, his knees cracking faintly. He walked to the bookshelf at the far end of the room, where hundreds of worn spines lined the dusty shelves. He searched for a long moment, then pulled down a thin, faded binder bound in cracked brown leather. "Sit tight," he said as he approached her. "I think it's time you learned something." The binder landed softly on the table between them. Aiyana blinked. "What's that?" "My past," Ellis said quietly. "The part nobody talks about." She straightened. "Granddad, you don't have to." "I do," he interrupted. "Because what's happening to you didn't start with you. And if you try to fight it without understanding the roots, you'll get hurt. Not because you're wrong, but because you're unprepared." He sat down again, fingertips tracing the edges of the leather. "You know I went to Southern State University when I was young," he began. "What you don't know is that I was at the top of my class. Dean's List every semester." Aiyana nodded slowly. "Mom mentioned you were brilliant." Ellis huffed a dry laugh. Brilliant didn't matter much back then. Not when a black man tried to outshine the wrong people. Aiyana's stomach tightened. "I worked on a thesis for 2 years," he continued. "The first comprehensive analysis of discriminatory zoning laws in our parish. It was detailed, documented, uncomfortable. My advisor said it would change the department." He paused. "Then a week before graduation, the thesis disappeared." Aiyana blinked. "Disappeared?" "Lost," Ellis said, using air quotes. "Conveniently. My advisor said he searched everywhere. But the head of the department, Professor Randall, said if I couldn't produce it, I couldn't graduate." "But you had backup copies, right?" "I did." He lifted a finger. "But when I brought them in, Randall said they weren't official versions. Something about formatting and missing signatures. Nonsense rules they never enforced before." Her breath caught. "You're kidding." "I wish I was." Aiyana stared at him, stunned. "So they failed you on purpose?" "That," Ellis said sharply, "is the clean version." He opened the binder. Inside were brittle pages, yellowed with age, covered in dense handwritten notes. Newspaper clippings stuck out in some places, official letters in others. Her eyes scanned one quickly. Notice of degree, ineligibility, dated. Aiyana's throat closed. "Granddad, they denied me my degree," he said simply. "Years of work thrown away because my research made them uncomfortable. Because they wanted to remind me where I stood." Tension rippled along her spine. She felt the echo of his pain, as if she'd lived it herself. "But why didn't you tell us?" she whispered. Ellis looked down, voice thickening. "I didn't want my children growing up believing education was rigged against them. I wanted them to try anyway, to believe they could rise." Aiyana exhaled, the pieces clicking into place. And suddenly her struggle with the Oxford Challenge wasn't isolated. It wasn't new. It was part of a lineage. A long, exhausting thread of people who pushed against a system built to push back. She thought of the anonymous email, the notes on her locker, the fake smiles from teachers, the quiet hostility, and the challenge, intentionally contradictory, intentionally impossible, just like Ellis's thesis being lost. History wasn't repeating. It was recycling. "You see?" Ellis said softly. "What they're doing to you isn't new. They've done it before. To me. To others before me. They want to make you doubt yourself until you shrink." Aiyana swallowed hard, hands curling around the binder's corners. "I won't shrink. I know." His eyes glistened with pride. "You're stronger than I ever was at your age." "But what do I do?" she asked. "I can't let them win." Ellis leaned forward, resting his weathered hand over hers. "You don't play by their rules. You expose their rules." Aiyana stared back at him, heart pounding. "Expose the challenge. Expose the intention behind it," he said. "You already figured out it wasn't from Oxford. That gives you leverage. And if you follow the trail long enough," he tapped the leather binder, "you might uncover something bigger." She felt a slow burn rise in her chest. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. For the first time in days, she felt grounded. Steady. She wasn't alone in this fight. She wasn't imagining the pattern. The pattern was the point. "Granddad," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm so tired." "I know." His voice softened. "But you're also ready." The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, faint and distant. The room felt suspended in that moment. Just her grandfather, and decades of unspoken history resting on the table. Ellis closed the binder gently. "Let me show you something." He stood again, walking slowly toward the hallway closet. Aiyana followed with her eyes, curiosity pulling at her ribs. He rummaged through a box on the top shelf, then returned with an object wrapped in linen. He set it down and unfolded the fabric. A small leather notebook, nearly falling apart at the spine, lay beneath. This, he said hoarsely, is the only thing they didn't take from me. Aiyana traced its cracked cover. What's inside? My real thesis, Ellis replied. The one they said didn't exist. Her breath hitched. You kept it all these years. I couldn't destroy it, he said. But I couldn't bear to read it either. It's a reminder of what they buried. Aiyana opened to the first page. His handwriting filled the lines. Sharp, meticulous, determined, and underneath that ink lay pain. Ambition. Theft. Silence. She looked up. Why show me now? Because you're fighting a battle I lost, Ellis whispered. And I want you to win yours differently. She closed the notebook gently. I'm going to expose what Penrose did. I know you will. And I'm going to expose the system behind him. Ellis nodded slowly. Then take this. He slid the leather notebook toward her. Aiyana hesitated. Granddad, this is your life. It's evidence, he corrected softly. Evidence of how far they'll go to bury the truth. She felt every inch of the moment pressing against her chest. The history, the hurt, the inheritance of resistance. He leaned in, voice low and steady. They buried me with lies. Bury them with truth. Ellis handed her an old leather notebook, whispering, They buried me with lies. Bury them with truth. The notebook sat on Aiyana's desk like an anchor. Its leather cracked with age, the pages yellowed and fragile. But inside it pulsed with power. Not just from what it held, but from what it proved, that history had tried to erase men, like Ellis Brooks, and young women like her, in quiet, deliberate ways. It didn't need to scream, it only needed to whisper. You don't belong here. But Aiyana heard that whisper differently now. She saw it for what it was, a lie. By the next morning, Aiyana had spread her desk with 2 stacks of documents. One her grandfather's buried thesis, the other Penrose's so-called challenge. The contrast was sharp. Her grandfather's thesis was layered with research, structure, logic. The challenge? It was a house built on sand. She didn't just want to prove it was flawed. She wanted to prove it was fake. She opened her laptop, pulled up JSTOR in the Oxford Digital Archives, and began her search. Penrose had sprinkled the challenge with references, footnotes, obscure theorems, vague acknowledgments that Dr. G. Thistleton had attempted a variation in 1991, and citations like Oxford Working Paper number 92. But when Aiyana keyed in the reference codes, nothing came up. No paper, no Thistleton, no archive entry. She tried different spellings, cross-checked international academic databases. Still nothing. She paused, frowning, then opened Google Scholar. Still blank. So she went deeper, checking university records, archived PDFs from discontinued departments, even research forums that hosted forgotten white papers from the early internet era. There was no Thistleton, no Working Paper 92 LF3, no trace of the theorem Penrose had built the challenge around, a supposed linguistic subversion paradox that didn't appear in any recognized journal. And then she remembered the watermark. She pulled out the scanned copy again, enhancing the contrast. There it was, CISLP, Cal Institute Systems Lab, Pasadena. Not Oxford, not even British. She typed the lab's name into a browser. It redirected to a defunct research facility shut down in 2011 for producing ineffective AI logic generators under falsified grant applications. Aiyana froze. She whispered the words aloud. Ineffective logic generators. Her eyes widened. That's why the problem didn't work. It wasn't built to work. It was generated by an early AI program that had been trained to mimic real logic, but had no capacity for truth-checking or coherence. The challenge wasn't real. It wasn't intellectual. It wasn't elite. It was recycled garbage from a broken machine, repackaged by Malcolm Penrose as a tool of silent sabotage. Her heart beat faster. She leaned back in her chair, feeling her chest tighten with a mix of vindication and fury. He didn't just want her to fail. He wanted her to fail publicly, to be exposed as a fraud. He'd taken junk data and dressed it up in academic polish, because if she failed a flawed test, it would look like her failure, not his. She could hear his voice now in her head. Unusually articulate. Now she knew why he'd said it. He didn't think she was intelligent. He thought she was naive, but not anymore. She began typing furiously. Her paper started with a question. Can intelligence be tested by a lie? She called it, The Illusion of Genius, a structural deconstruction of a rigged academic problem. The introduction was bold, deliberate. She laid out the challenge word for word, then broke it down line by line. She annotated every contradiction, cross-referenced the missing citations, and footnoted the source of the AI generator used by the Cal Institute lab. She even attached the lab's final shutdown report, highlighting where the research had been deemed mathematically void. Then she took it further. She documented the social context, the environment in which the challenge had been given, the pattern of racist microaggressions that had followed, the anonymous emails, and the online humiliation. She didn't just want to prove it was fake. She wanted to prove that it was weaponized. The paper grew longer. Her fingers blurred across the keyboard. Her mind moved with ruthless clarity. Her rage became focus. Her fear became structure. By sunset, the document was 28 pages long, part thesis, part exposé, part manifesto. It was too late to pretend she wanted to be liked. Too late to stay polite. She wanted to be heard. She printed 5 copies, each with a different purpose. One for herself, one for her grandfather, one for her school principal, one for a local journalist, and one for Oxford's admissions board. She addressed the envelope carefully. Added a cover letter. No emotion. Just facts, links, evidence. All verifiable. But before she could seal it, her phone buzzed. A new message. Same unknown sender. This time, a photo. It showed a scan of her own paper, time-stamped only minutes earlier. Then a message followed. Nice try, but no one's going to read it. Her blood chilled. How had they gotten her paper? She looked at her screen again, then at her email. Nothing had been sent yet. No one else had a copy, except the printer downstairs. She bolted from her desk and ran to the kitchen, heart pounding. Her father's office connected to their printer via the home network. She stepped inside, looked at the desk, and there it was. One printed copy, opened, marked up, with a yellow sticky note that read, "You're wasting your time." Her father wasn't home. Her mother was asleep, which meant someone had been inside the house. Her body locked in place. The intruder didn't take anything. They didn't break in. They left nothing else behind. Just a message. Just a reminder. They're watching. She gathered the pages, hands trembling slightly, and backed out of the office. Her vision was clear, but her breath came in short, ragged bursts. She was being threatened. Not with violence, but with invisibility. No one's going to read it. But she didn't stop. She sealed the envelope, taped it shut, and walked straight to the nearest post office, ignoring the cold air biting at her skin, ignoring the fear coiling in her chest like a rope tightening around her ribs. She placed the envelope in the outgoing mail slot, pressed it all the way down with both hands. The metal clicked shut. Done. Whatever happened next, she wasn't going to be silent anymore. Later that night, Aiyana sat at the kitchen table again. Her grandfather sat across from her, slowly turning the pages of her paper. He didn't say much, just nodded. Then finally, he looked up. "You turned the weapon into evidence." "That was the point," she whispered. "You know this might get bigger than you. I'm counting on it." He gave her a long, heavy stare, then a slow smile. "You've got our whole bloodline in that spine of yours," he said. "They just don't know who they picked a fight with." She smiled back, tired, but sharp. And as the wind howled outside their small house, a sense of certainty settled into her bones. She hadn't just decoded the problem. She had cracked the lie beneath it. But she also knew something else. This wasn't over. Because power doesn't surrender just because truth knocks on its door. It slams the windows shut. And tomorrow the wind would change. She would have to be ready. Aiyana printed 5 copies and mailed one to Oxford's admissions board. It started quietly. A ripple in a digital ocean too large to notice right away. Someone, she never figured out who, posted a cropped image of her paper's cover on Reddit. The title alone was enough to spark curiosity. "The Illusion of Genius, a structural deconstruction of a rigged academic problem." Underneath, the caption read, "High school girl exposes fake Oxford challenge, calls out systemic racism in academic testing." At first it got a few upvotes, a handful of comments, mostly curious, some skeptical, but within 2 hours, it spread. Twitter picked it up. A few student activists reshared it. Then a STEM podcast host with 300K followers posted a thread. "If this is legit, and it looks like it is, this girl just pulled off one of the most brutal academic exposes I've ever seen. She's 7. By that night, Oxford Challenge was trending. And Aiyana's name was no longer just whispered in hallways. It was written in caps across thousands of screens. She sat frozen in her room, her laptop open, as alerts flooded in. Mentions, retweets, DMs, praise, doubt. A few messages that simply read, "Thank you." But alongside them came the rod. The first wave of trolls arrived like a storm front. Anonymous users accusing her of lying, calling her arrogant, asking why a diversity admit thought she could outsmart Oxford. Then the real venom started. Someone dug up her school photo and posted it with a caption, "Meet the black girl who thinks she's smarter than a British institution." Lelame. Another tweeted, "She should have just mopped the floors like her ancestors." Aiyana's stomach turned. She refreshed the screen. Another thread. Dozens of replies. Affirmative action working overtime. This is why they don't belong in these spaces. Always crying racism when they get caught cheating. She scrolled faster. Her hands cold. Her pulse erratic. One message read simply, "We see you." The hate wasn't just personal. It was historical. Weaponized. Aimed not just at her mind, but at her existence. She closed her laptop. But the notifications kept coming. At school the next day, the hallways buzzed louder than ever. Some students watched her like she was radioactive. Others, like Lorraine, rolled their eyes openly when she passed. Still others looked impressed, but cautiously so, like they weren't sure if standing too close might make them a target too. When she passed Jackson Ryle, a senior who'd once asked to copy her homework, he leaned toward his friend and muttered just loud enough, "Can't believe she stole my solution and got famous for it." Her steps faltered. She turned slowly. "You said what?" she asked, voice low. Jackson raised his hands mockingly. "Relax. Just saying it's weird how your little solution looks like something I was working on weeks ago." "You didn't even read the challenge," she snapped. He shrugged. "You're right, but who's gonna believe you didn't cheat?" Aiyana's mouth went dry. She walked away without another word. Her jaw tight, her ears burning. The lie was spreading. That afternoon, the school's official Twitter account posted a statement. "We are aware of recent online attention surrounding one of our students. We do not endorse or condemn independent research unless it is school-affiliated. Marston Prep remains committed to academic integrity." Neutral. Deliberately so. Aiyana read it 3 times. Not a name. Not a defense. Just a refusal to pick a side. Her inbox pinged again. This time a forwarded message from the office. A complaint had been filed, anonymously, accusing her of academic dishonesty and manipulation of online attention for personal gain. No hearing. No meeting. Just a cold email asking her to respond formally and briefly. She stared at it, sickened. Her own school wasn't standing behind her. It was distancing itself from her like she was a liability. The next few days blurred. More journalists reached out. Some offered interviews. Others hit pieces. A conservative blogger published an article titled, "Another Race Hoax. Black Student Falsely Accuses Oxford Tutor of Sabotage." It was riddled with inaccuracies, claiming she'd fabricated the challenge, that her grandfather's thesis story was unverifiable, that woke hysteria had replaced academic rigor. One line burned. "This is not bravery. This is the weaponization of victimhood by a teenager who can't handle competition." She read it twice, heart pounding. Then she closed the tab and opened her email. Subject line, "Formal response from University of Oxford." She stared at it. For several seconds she couldn't move. Finally she clicked. "Dear Ms. Aiyana Brooks, we have received your correspondence, an attached research document regarding the academic challenge issued by Dr. Malcolm Penrose. After preliminary internal review, your findings have raised significant concerns. We would like to invite you to a formal academic discussion and review session on our campus. Please confirm your availability for travel and attendance within 7. This will be a closed meeting with members of our Academic Ethics Board and Outreach Program. We thank you for your initiative and courage. Warm regards, Oxford Admissions and Ethics Committee." She exhaled. Part relief, part disbelief. They'd responded. They wanted to meet, but the words felt both promising and ominous. A closed meeting? No media, no transparency, just her and the very institution she'd challenged. She reread the email again.
This is it, she thought.
But before she could reply, another notification popped up. A direct message from an unknown account. "They're not inviting you to listen. They're inviting you to contain you." Aiyana stared at the words, unmoving. Outside, thunder cracked faintly in the distance. Oxford finally replied. They wanted to meet Aiyana in person. The air outside Heathrow was cold, damp, and unfamiliar. the kind of chill that crept into Aiyana's skin and settled in her bones. As she stepped off the plane, her heart pounded a quiet rhythm of determination and anxiety. She wasn't here for a celebration. She wasn't here as a guest. She was entering enemy territory, dressed in a navy blazer and soft-heeled boots, carrying a binder that felt heavier than it should. She was here to confront the machine. Oxford's driver greeted her at the terminal, holding a sign that simply read, Brooks. He didn't smile, didn't speak much, and drove in silence through winding cobblestone roads, past centuries-old architecture that exuded prestige. The university rose in the distance like a monument to legacy and exclusion. Aiyana tried not to be intimidated, but the history pressed against the car windows like a suffocating fog. She thought of all the people who had never made it inside these walls, and now, here she was. Not just inside, but summoned. But summoned for what? The meeting invitation had used words like review, discussion, evaluation. None of them meant safety. None of them meant fairness. The car stopped in front of an ivy-covered building with tall arched windows. A security guard buzzed her in and led her to a narrow corridor, then up 2 flights of stone stairs to a wooden door with a brass plaque. Department of Ethics and Academic Outreach. She adjusted her blazer, took a breath, and stepped inside. The room was rectangular, its walls lined with books, its ceiling high and echoing. At the far end, a long mahogany table stretched beneath hanging lights. 5 professors sat behind it, spaced evenly like judges at a tribunal. Their faces were mostly unreadable, expressions of polite disinterest sharpened by academic pride. In the center, sitting like a statue, was Dr. Malcolm Penrose. He didn't nod, didn't acknowledge her, just stared. Aiyana met his eyes and held the gaze, refusing to blink first. A woman with silver hair and a clipped British accent gestured to a lone chair across from the table. Miss Brooks, she said, we appreciate your willingness to travel. Aiyana sat, spine straight, chin up. Thank you, she said. The woman continued. We have reviewed your document, and while your analysis was provocative, it raised several questions. We've invited you here not for a reprimand, but for clarification, possibly even recognition, should it be warranted. Aiyana nodded once. I understand. We will begin, another professor said, with a task. He slid a sealed envelope toward her across the table. She picked it up slowly. This, the woman explained, is a modified challenge from our graduate-level philosophy and logic curriculum. We would like you to solve it, or should you find it problematic, to explain why. Aiyana's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. She scanned the page once. Then again, her stomach tightened. The structure was eerily familiar. The same ambiguous premises, the same shifting logic gates, the same vague citation references that couldn't be sourced. It wasn't a challenge. It was a sequel, another trap, designed not to test her mind, but to unmake it. They wanted her to dance for them, or crumble. Either way, it served their purpose. But this time, she was ready. She didn't touch her pen. Instead, she looked up and smiled. Respectfully, she began. This problem contains embedded contradictions designed to appear intellectually complex, but are, in fact, structurally incoherent. The room tensed. One of the professors furrowed his brow. Explain. She stood up slowly, without permission, and walked toward the chalkboard behind her. If you'll allow me, she said. No one stopped her. She picked up a piece of chalk, and with practiced control, began outlining the logical flow of the problem. This premise, she said, underlining the first line, relies on a dual assumption of truth and paradox. In classical logic, that's already a red flag. It's called a self-invalidating premise. She turned. Penrose's jaw was clenched. This segment here, she continued, uses terminology that is undefined. There's no universally accepted academic meaning for inverse extrapolative identity, which I believe is a term invented to sound legitimate while remaining unverifiable. A few professors exchanged glances. This final question, Aiyana said, circling the bottom paragraph, asks for an extrapolation from undefined logic, using data not provided. That's not a test. That's an exercise in academic obfuscation. She dropped the chalk, her hands steady now. Silence followed. The silver-haired woman leaned forward. Are you suggesting we intentionally presented a flawed problem? I'm suggesting that Dr. Penrose has a pattern of disguising intellectual sabotage as academic rigor, Aiyana said calmly, and that I was targeted by this pattern. Penrose scoffed, breaking his silence. The ego of youth, he said, voice dripping with disdain. Assuming intention and complexity. Perhaps what you call sabotage is merely your failure to grasp the problem's depth. Aiyana stepped forward. Then why do your source citations lead to disbanded labs? Why do the referenced papers not exist? Why was the original challenge recycled from a failed AI project in California? Penrose's face paled. I'm not just here to defend myself, she said, her voice sharper now. I'm here to reveal that this system, this institution, allows people like you to gatekeep, under the guise of testing. You didn't expect me to see through it. You expected me to fail quietly. The silence became uncomfortable. Then, unexpectedly, one of the professors, an older man with thick glasses, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Who are you really, Miss Brooks? The question wasn't sarcastic. It was curious. It was shaken. Aiyana looked him in the eye, her voice unwavering. I'm the result of what happens when someone who was never supposed to be in the room gets in, and brings the receipts. The professor nodded slowly, visibly unsettled. Penrose looked like he might explode. But then, the unexpected twist. From the doorway behind them, a man in a gray suit stepped inside, holding a folder. His presence shifted the air. Apologies, he said, addressing the board. May I have a moment? The silver-haired woman stood. Dr. Roussel, what is this? He opened the folder and slid a document onto the table. We received a complaint from an Oxford alumnus regarding the misuse of research materials, an academic fraud. It involves multiple past cases tied to Dr. Penrose's outreach assessments. Penrose flinched. According to our internal logs, Roussel continued, Dr. Penrose has used derivative versions of discredited logic problems in at least 4 different schools, all with predominantly minority scholarship applicants. The room went still, completely still. The silver-haired professor turned slowly toward Malcolm. Is this true? Penrose opened his mouth, but no words came out. Aiyana didn't blink. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because this time, the room spoke for her. One professor leaned forward and muttered, Who are you really, Miss Brooks? The news broke before her plane even touched back down in Louisiana. By the time Aiyana landed, her inbox had exploded with requests, interviews, press inquiries, podcasts, even a documentary offer. But none of it felt triumphant. The video of her calmly dismantling Oxford's challenge, calling out Penrose in a room full of stunned academics, had been leaked by someone on the ethics board. It was meant to be confidential, but it wasn't anymore. The world had seen it, and the world was split. Some praised her composure, calling her a new kind of scholar, the embodiment of modern genius, unapologetically black and brilliant. But others weren't celebrating. When she returned to school, the shift was instant. No applause, no congratulation, just eyes. Cold, narrow eyes. The kind that searched not for brilliance, but for a reason to resent it. Principal Aldridge summoned her before third period. His office was sleek, designed for donors, not students. Faux leather chairs, framed photos of alumni shaking hands with senators. Aiyana sat across from him, backpack still on her shoulder. He didn't look up right away. I saw the video, he said finally. So did most of the world. Aiyana replied. He sighed, folding his hands. Do you know how much backlash this school is facing right now? Aiyana blinked. For what? For being connected to controversy. For letting a student take personal academic grievances to the global stage. There are consequences. Are you saying I should have kept quiet? I'm saying you could have handled it differently. She leaned forward. Handled what differently? Being targeted? Being lied to? I'm not saying you're wrong, he said quickly. But there are optics. Sponsors are nervous. Parents are calling. They're saying your presence here is... He stopped himself. But it was already said. A distraction, she finished coldly. He didn't deny it. You asked me to represent the school when I won regional debate, she said. You used my face in your brochure. You called me the future. That was before I made people uncomfortable. He said nothing. She stood. Then I'm still doing what I was always meant to do. And she walked out. The backlash was swift. A local news station ran a segment with the headline, Oxford Firestorm, Marston Prep Student Sparks Academic Scandal. They showed clips from the hearing but played them out of context, splicing together Aiyana's words in a way that made her sound hostile, self-righteous, smug. The comments poured in, typical of this generation, can't take a test without crying racism. Just another diversity hire waiting to happen. She's making the school look bad. Within a week, 3 of the school's gala sponsors pulled out. In a board email leaked to staff, one trustee wrote, "We cannot let one student hijack the narrative of Marston Prep." Parents began organizing. Some openly questioned whether Aiyana had fabricated the entire scandal. A few suggested she'd hacked the original challenge herself to make it look flawed. One even emailed the school with a proposal. "Perhaps it's best for all parties if Ms. Brooks finishes the semester remotely." Remote. As in, invisible. At lunch she sat alone. The same table where she once shared fries with friends now felt like a spotlight, not a seat. Her best friend, Michaela, had gone quiet. No texts, no eye contact, nothing. Until that Wednesday. Michaela slid into the seat across from her, eyes darting around. "People are saying you're gonna sue the school," she whispered. "I'm not," Aiyana replied. "They think you might, that you're working with a lawyer." "I'm working with facts." Michaela looked down, playing with the edge of her sleeve. She hesitated. "I didn't think it would get this big." Aiyana frowned. "You mean you didn't think I would get this big?" "No, I didn't mean it like that. You mean you were cool with me being smart?" Aiyana said, voice low. "But not this smart." Michaela said nothing. And that said everything. Aiyana stood, tray untouched. "Don't worry, you won't have to sit with me much longer." That night, her mother came home tense, silent during dinner, eyes hollowed out by stress. "What's wrong?" Aiyana asked finally. Her mother hesitated. "A client pulled a contract today." Aiyana's heart dropped. "Why?" "They said it's nothing personal. Just too much heat. Right now." Aiyana sat back in her chair, guilt washing over her like cold water. "I didn't want this to hurt you." Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it. "This isn't your fault. This is what happens when people realize they can't control you." "But it's affecting you." Her mother's voice was steady. "Then I'll fight too." Friday morning. The halls were quieter than usual. Students moved in clusters, whispering. When Aiyana arrived at her locker, something felt off. She turned the dial, opened the door, and froze. Books torn apart, pages shredded. A red liquid, maybe ketchup, maybe paint, smeared across the walls of the locker in messy handprints. And in the center, taped to the inside wall, was a single white note. Block letters. Black ink. "Go back to where you came from." Aiyana stood still. The hallway spun slightly around her. No one stopped. No one helped. Some glanced over, then looked away quickly. She didn't cry. Not yet. She reached in, pulled the note out slowly, folded it once, then twice, and placed it in her pocket. Behind her, laughter echoed from down the corridor. Her pulse remained steady. But inside, something began to harden. Aiyana opened her locker to find it trashed. Inside, a note read, "Go back to where you came from." The note from her locker stayed folded in Aiyana's coat pocket for 2 days before she took it out again. Not because she was afraid to look at it, but because she needed to remind herself that silence wasn't survival. It was complicity, and she'd been silent long enough. That Monday, when she walked into school, she noticed something odd. A few heads nodded at her. Not all of them. Not even most. But a few. A black sophomore she didn't know made quick eye contact and gave the smallest of nods. A Latina senior in the hallway bumped into her and whispered, "Thank you," so quickly that Aiyana wasn't sure she imagined it. The walls hadn't fallen, but the cracks had begun. She didn't go to the administration. She didn't plead for protection. Instead, she did something more dangerous. She listened. It started with a DM. From an account with no profile picture, no bio, just a single message. "They did it to me too. But no one believed me." Attached was a screenshot. An email thread from a science fair submission, 3 years ago. A Latinx student had proposed a project on environmental racism in the city's industrial zoning. The proposal had been lost, then denied, then disqualified. Aiyana replied, "Can I call you?" The next night, her laptop screen lit up with the face of 20-year-old Emilio Torres, now a sophomore at a state college. He told her everything. How his project had been praised until he submitted the final draft, then mysteriously downgraded. How another student had later done a similar project and won. How his complaints had been taken seriously and then buried. "You're not crazy," he said. "You just said it louder." The next message came from a girl still enrolled, a quiet senior named Shayla, who had never spoken more than 2 words to Aiyana before. She passed her a handwritten note during physics, barely making eye contact. Inside, it read, I wrote an op-ed for the school paper about racial bias in the student council elections. The advisor pulled it last minute, said it would create division. Never published it. Aiyana stared at the note. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't just happening to her. It never was. Over the next week, more stories trickled in. A black freshman whose English essay had been flagged for plagiarism because it was too advanced for someone his age. A white student who admitted that when he partnered with a black classmate, the teacher always gave him the credit. A South Asian girl whose science fair data had been quietly used in another student's award-winning project without her name on it. None of them had ever spoken up, but now they were whispering. The whispers grew into a pattern, and patterns are where Aiyana thrived. She built the archive in one night. A website. Bare bones. Password protected. Title: The Silent Records. Each story was labeled only with a code. No names, no identifying info. Just the facts. Screenshots. Emails. Testimonials. All cross-verified. All time-stamped. She included her own story at the bottom. Numbered. Then she sent a link to every student who had reached out. If you want to add yours, she wrote, this is your space. No school filters. No edits. Just your truth. By morning there were 8 entries. By the end of the week there were 34. They weren't just about race. Some were about gender, class, neurodivergence. But the majority traced the same arc. Excellence punished. Truth muted. Progress diluted. It was a mirror held up to the system. And the reflection was damning. The archive stayed underground until someone leaked it. A screenshot from the silent records was posted anonymously on a student meme page. The caption read, turns out Aiyana wasn't the first. Just the first to say fuck this. It exploded. Students started sharing the link in whispers. Teachers tried to downplay it. The administration issued a vague warning about unauthorized digital platforms. But it was too late. The stories had oxygen now. And then came the twist. One of the stories, entry 0118, was about a teacher. A popular one. A white male math teacher who'd quietly sabotaged students of color by changing their final project weights. The receipts were in the archive. Screenshots, grading spreadsheets, messages where he dismissed a student's concern with relax, you probably just didn't understand it. The teacher was quietly removed from the classroom, pending review. No announcement. No transparency. But everyone knew. The archive had drawn blood. Aiyana's inbox flooded again. Not just with students, but with parents, with alumni, with whispers from other schools asking if they could submit their own entries. This is bigger than Marston, someone wrote. You started something, another messaged. We've been waiting for a space like this. Then the email came from a woman named Lillian Marks, a civil rights attorney. Subject line, read the silent records. Aiyana opened it, heart pounding. Hi Aiyana. I've been reviewing the submissions in your archive with interest and growing concern. I've represented students in discrimination cases for the past 15 years. What you've collected here isn't just important, it may be legally actionable. If the entries are verified, and I believe many can be, this could form the basis for a class action lawsuit against your school district. I'm reaching out to you first, not as a lawyer, but as a black woman who knows what it means to be too loud in the wrong room. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to walk you through your options. You're not alone. You never were. Lillian Marks, Civil Rights Law, Atlanta. Aiyana stared at the message. The cursor blinked under the final line, like it was daring her to breathe. For the first time since this began, she realized something, terrifying and electrifying. She hadn't just built an archive. She'd lit a fuse, and the explosion was coming. A lawyer contacted Aiyana with a message. Your archive? It might be grounds for a class action suit. Malcolm Penrose was losing control, and he knew it. For decades, his reputation had remained untouched. He was seen as the soft-spoken intellectual, a gatekeeper of tradition, a civilized thinker in academic circles, where polite exclusion passed as meritocracy. He built his legacy on measured tones, credentialed respectability, and a talent for making sure the door only opened for the right kind of student. But now, a 17-year-old black girl from Louisiana was dragging the bones of that legacy into daylight. And she wasn't just questioning his methods. She was proving them false. The ethics hearing at Oxford had been a warning. The whispers among the faculty, once deferential, had grown louder. An internal review had already been launched. One professor had openly asked for his previous evaluations to be audited. Another demanded an apology. Malcolm didn't respond with reflection. He responded with fire. 3 days after Aiyana's silent records archive went viral, a statement was posted on Malcolm's personal website, titled, "An Open Letter to Those Who Still Believe in Academic Integrity." It began with flattery, then it turned sharp. While I've dedicated my career to mentoring underrepresented students, recent attacks on my character have weaponized half-truths and social media outrage in an effort to dismantle what little structure academia has left. The student at the center of this circus, Aiyana Brooks, has misrepresented her interactions with me, misconstrued the nature of our challenge, and I now suspect forged the documents she claims to have received. I have always encouraged inquiry. But what Ms. Brooks presents is not inquiry, it is paranoia wrapped in personal narrative. I am heartbroken that such vitriol is being accepted as truth, without question. The letter was signed and dated. Beneath it were 3 screenshots of supposed email exchanges between Aiyana and Malcolm, emails she had never sent. One claimed she had requested a challenge for extra attention. Another appeared to admit that she had tweaked the problem to make it seem flawed. A third suggested she had revised and repackaged the problem to fit a personal narrative. They were false. All of them. But to the uninformed eye, they looked real. And for a moment, the tide shifted. Media outlets picked it up within hours. Headlines swirled. Oxford tutor fights back. Was the viral challenge a hoax? Student accused of academic manipulation. Pundits weighed in on both sides. Morning shows debated whether Aiyana was a truth-teller or a troubled attention seeker. Conservative influencers posted videos calling her the perfect symbol of Gen Z victim culture. A well-known radio host said she was using race to bypass merit. And worst of all, some of her own classmates started to believe it. I mean, why would he lie? One student posted on the school's group chat. He's Oxford. She's 17. Someone replied.
Yeah, receipts or not, something feels off.
The doubt was spreading like poison. But Aiyana wasn't shaken, because she did have receipts. She had every email, with headers, timestamps, IP addresses, and digital signatures. She had the original challenge file, with metadata proving its creation date, its author name, N. Penrose, and the embedded watermark from the failed AI generator in Pasadena. She'd even backed up the files on an external drive, a cloud folder, and a private legal repository shared with her attorney Lillian Marks. So when the headlines rolled in, she didn't panic. She published a counter-statement. No drama, no emotion, just link. To those asking for proof, here it is. Attached are the original documents, metadata, and verification logs. I've never needed to fabricate anything. The truth was always enough. Aiyana Brooks. She included a side-by-side comparison of Malcolm's doctored emails and the originals. She ran them through a forensic verification tool, highlighting font inconsistencies, server mismatched data, and the fact that one of Malcolm's emails referenced an event that hadn't happened yet at the time of the supposed message. The truth hit harder than any accusation. Within hours, another shift. Students who had doubted her began reposting her thread with apologies. A few even tagged Malcolm's account, demanding a response. None came, but someone else did respond. A quiet post from an Oxford faculty member, anonymous at first, then confirmed. We've reviewed the metadata. Ms. Brooks is telling the truth. The challenge was not only falsified, it was recycled from a source that violates academic integrity standards. The post didn't just defend Aiyana, it condemned Penrose. But Malcolm wasn't done. In a last attempt to salvage his narrative, he went live. A pre-recorded video, seated in a room filled with books, classical music playing faintly in the background. A fireplace flickering beside him. He wore his signature navy blazer. He spoke with practiced cadence. I am deeply saddened, he said, that the modern student has confused critique with conspiracy, that we've created a climate where simply being accused is a conviction. I have worked with hundreds of young scholars. Some have succeeded, others have stumbled, but never before has my integrity been attacked with such ferocity by someone so. He paused, then said it. So ungrateful. Aiyana stared at the screen. There it was, the word, ungrateful. The classic branding of a black student who refused to play nice. But this time, the world noticed. One tweet, simple, piercing, went viral. He said ungrateful. That's all you need to know. It was retweeted over 100,000 times. Soon after, ungrateful genius began trending. People began posting stories of teachers, professors, and mentors who had expected silence in exchange for scraps. who had offered opportunity laced with conditional acceptance, who pulled back support the moment students pushed too far, shined too brightly, or challenged too loudly. Aiyana's inbox filled with these stories. One line repeated again and again. They said I should be grateful too. Then came the twist. One of Malcolm's former students, now a PhD candidate, published an open letter. She shared her own experience, how Malcolm had offered her a unique challenge in her junior year, how the challenge made no sense, how when she failed it, he told her she wasn't ready for advanced logic. She included the original file he gave her. It matched Aiyana's. Same formatting, same contradictions, same intent. 2 students, same manipulation, same man. And suddenly the media tide snapped like a rubber band. Malcolm's name was no longer in headlines about mentorship. It was now in stories about academic misconduct. An investigation was confirmed. Oxford suspended him from his outreach duties pending review. And in that storm of reckoning, Aiyana received one more message. From a major British newspaper. Subject: exclusive feature offer. Aiyana, we've followed your story from the beginning. After reviewing all evidence, and speaking to several faculty members, we believe your voice is critical in understanding the future of academic equity. We'd like to publish your full story, unedited. Are you interested? The Guardian. You. Aiyana stared at the message, her fingers hovering above the keys. They weren't offering her a quote. They were offering her the microphone. A major British newspaper reached out. We want to publish your full story, unedited. For the second time in a month, Aiyana walked through the ancient halls of Oxford. But this time it felt different. She wasn't here as a test subject. She wasn't a quiet observer in a lion's den. She wasn't on trial. This time she had been invited, not reluctantly, not secretly, but publicly, and with the weight of a world watching. Oxford's Board of Governors, under massive public pressure and internal dissent, had launched a formal inquiry into Dr. Malcolm Penrose's outreach practices. The investigation expanded quickly, revealing irregularities in not just Aiyana's case, but in dozens of others. Patterns, silences, convenient failures, all of it laid out in data, emails, timeline. The tipping point. The Guardian's front page feature, the girl who exposed Oxford's quiet gatekeeping, unedited, full spread. Aiyana's voice, her words, her facts. Within 48 hours, the story had been shared globally. Professors wrote op-eds, students marched, schools discussed curriculum changes. Some wanted her awarded, others wanted her silenced. Oxford had no choice. They called her back, this time to speak before the full ethics committee. And this time she didn't walk in with fear. She walked in with purpose. The room was circular, its domed ceiling painted with centuries-old emblems and coats of arms. Beneath it sat 10 committee members, scholars in robes, some curious, some skeptical, some visibly uncomfortable. At the far end, the chair of the committee, Sir Alistair Quenby, tapped a pen on his notes. Beside him, an empty chair, once Malcolm Penrose's. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Aiyana stood at the podium in the center, a single spotlight illuminating her figure. No screen behind her, no presentation slides, just her voice. She began slowly, steadily. Good afternoon. My name is Aiyana Brooks. I'm 17 years old. I attend Marston Preparatory School in Louisiana. I'm here today not as a disruption, but as a reflection of what's been ignored, of what's been silenced. A murmur rolled through the audience. She continued, unshaken. I was given a challenge, one designed not to test intellect, but to sabotage it. A problem created from discarded AI models, wrapped in language meant to confuse, discredit, and disqualify. Not because I was unworthy, but because I wasn't expected to understand I was being excluded. She paused. Let the silence settle. Let me be clear, this isn't just about a puzzle, it's about a pattern. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out documents, receipts, data, timelines, emails. She laid them out, line by line, thread by thread. Her tone was calm but deliberate. Each point she made built upon the last, not as an attack but as a revelation. She showed how Penrose had recycled flawed problems across multiple institutions, how those problems were only ever handed to Black, brown, and low-income students, how failure was expected, and when success came, it was twisted into suspicion. Then she did something unexpected. She held up a photograph. It was her grandfather, Ellis Brooks, at 19, standing in front of his university library, a thin man with fire in his eyes, and books clutched to his chest. "This is Ellis Brooks," she said. He was denied his degree after his thesis went missing. The professor who supervised him retired with honors. My grandfather became a postman. The room quieted further. My story isn't new. It's just documented. She turned to the committee. "You want to understand how systemic bias survives in modern academia? It doesn't come in the form of slurs or slams. It comes in the form of vanishing opportunities. Invisible ceilings. Challenges designed to waste time, break confidence, and protect the gate." Her voice sharpened. "If you only welcome genius in certain colors, it isn't genius you value, it's obedience." The room didn't move. Aiyana stood steady, eyes locked on the board. "I came here alone. I leave here louder." And then, silence. A silence that held for 7 full seconds. Then, slow movement. Sir Alistair Quinby stood. He was older than the rest, with silver hair, piercing eyes, and a reputation for conservative traditionalism. Many thought he'd oppose her from the start, but he didn't speak right away. He looked at her, then at the documents, then at the empty chair. Finally, he leaned forward.
"You've just rewritten how we see this institution," he said.
The room held its breath, but he wasn't finished. "And if we are wise," he added, "we'll let you keep writing." The committee chair stood slowly and said, "You've just rewritten how we see this institution. Truth always demands payment." And in Aiyana's case, it came swiftly, like interest collected with compound force. The morning after her Oxford presentation, the headlines were still circulating. Her quotes were clipped into reels, her photo used in every thumbnail, sometimes triumphant, other times mocking. One article titled her the disruptor, while another labeled her the girl who accused a giant. But back in Brookhaven, the air was colder, and not just from the weather. Her father, Andre Brooks, owned a small accounting firm that had served families and small businesses for over 20 years. Steady work. Trust earned. But by Thursday, 3 longtime clients had pulled their contracts. One sent a message that read simply, "With everything going on, we're going in a different direction. No hard feelings." But there were hard feelings. "They didn't even ask if it was true," he told Aiyana quietly over dinner. "They just saw your name and ran." Her mother, Patrice, didn't say much that night. But the next morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She worked as a nurse administrator at a local hospital. Respected, reliable. But when she opened her email, she found over a dozen messages with subject lines like, "Your daughter's a fraud. Tell her to stay in her lane. Shame on your family." And one with a screenshot of their house from Google Maps. Attached to it was a message, "We see where your lies live." By noon, someone had doxed her. Full name, work address, school affiliations. Aiyana's school records were leaked too, along with a photo of her application essay to Oxford, scraped from a scholarship database. Someone had gone digging deep. When the admissions portal for her college applications opened that week, Aiyana logged in with hope. Instead, she found errors. Her file for Stanford showed as incomplete. Her Harvard application listed a missing recommendation letter, one she knew had been submitted. At Yale, the system listed her transcript under another name entirely. She called, emailed, waited on hold. The responses were all the same. "We're not sure what happened. Maybe try resubmitting. This isn't usually a system-wide issue. We'll escalate your case." But nothing changed. Her applications were frozen, and no one was giving her answers. Even the press turned. One journalist who had championed her early on backed away. "I've been told to move on from this story," he wrote in a private DM. "I support you, but I can't risk my position. I hope you understand." Another reporter from a national outlet ghosted her after she submitted written responses to their interview questions. She saw the signs. Support was conditional. Change was allowed, but only in moderation. And she had gone too far, too fast, too unapologetically. Still, Aiyana didn't stop. She kept publishing on the silent records. She kept replying to messages. She kept answering calls from students who whispered their truths late at night, when no one else was listening. Until one evening, just after midnight, she heard the glass break. It came from the front of the house. Sharp, sudden, a sound that cracked the stillness like a gunshot. She ran down the stairs barefoot, heart hammering. Her father was already there, standing frozen in front of the living room window, shards of glass glittering across the floor like ice. On the porch, in black spray paint, smeared across the white wood. Liar, in all cap. The brick that had shattered the window lay beside the dining table. Aiyana stared at it, her breath gone. Her mother called the police, but by the time they arrived, the street was quiet again. No neighbors came out. No cameras caught a face. Just silence and a cold wind. The next morning, she woke up to find her father already outside, painting over the word on the porch in thick, even strokes. He didn't say anything, just kept working, erasing. Her mother stood by the window, arms folded, phone in hand. Should we go public with this? Aiyana asked. Patrice exhaled. That's what they want. To bait you. But if we stay silent, we stay alive. The room stayed still for a moment. Then Patrice softened. You're right to speak, she said. But now we have to be smart about how. Aiyana nodded, but her jaw was tight. This wasn't just backlash anymore. This was warfare, and the enemies had no uniforms. That night she couldn't sleep. Her laptop sat beside her bed, open but dimmed. Notifications kept popping up. More stories submitted to the archive, more messages of support, and warnings. One message said, they'll smear you until there's nothing left to smear. Another, they did the same thing to my cousin. Only difference? He didn't make it this far. She closed the laptop. Then her phone buzzed. Blocked number. She stared at the screen for 3 rings. Then answered.
There was no voice.
Just breathing. Then a man whispered, we know where you're going next. Click. The line went dead. She didn't move. She didn't scream. She just sat there in the dark, holding the phone like it was still warm. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, she felt it. The weight of it all. The cost of truth. The real, terrifying price of being right, when the system needed her to be wrong. But deep beneath the fear, she felt something else too. Rage. Not loud, but patient. Steady. Ready. That night, her phone buzzed. A blocked number said, we know where you're going next. The morning after the call, Aiyana barely touched her breakfast. The words still echoed through her head. We know where you're going next. They weren't a question. They were a promise. She didn't tell her parents. Not yet. She just pulled her hoodie over her head, packed her laptop and walked out the door. But the silence didn't last long. By noon, her phone buzzed again. This time not from a blocked number, but from an unknown New York contact. The message was direct.
The morning panel wants you on the show. Live segment. National TV. UN.
She stared at the screen, blinking. The morning panel wasn't just any talk show. It was a cultural pulse point, where the nation's political, social, and emotional flashpoints played out in real time. They didn't invite teenagers. They didn't do sympathy segments. If they were calling this was bigger than her. She replied, yes. Within hours, her flight was booked. When she walked onto the soundstage 2 days later, the host Simone Ray, a sharp, unflinching black journalist known for dismantling whitewashed narratives, greeted her with a quiet nod. I've been waiting for you, Simone said. Aiyana offered a small smile, nervous but focused. I'm ready. The lights went on. Cameras rolled. The host turned toward the lens. Today we speak to the student, who exposed one of the world's most elite institutions, and in doing so exposed a system many didn't want to admit existed. Aiyana's heartbeat raced, but her voice stayed calm. She didn't rehearse anything. She just told the truth. She spoke about Malcolm, about the challenge, about her grandfather's erased thesis, about how academic power could hide behind politeness. And she ended with one line that broke the internet. They didn't expect me to pass the test because they never expected me to recognize that I wasn't the one being tested. That quote alone was clipped, captioned, and shared across every platform within an hour. TikTok Reels, Instagram story graphics, think pieces. College students printed it on shirts. Even the White House press secretary was asked to comment on the Brooks controversy. It was no longer just a school scandal. It was a movement. Then came the next twist. A black congresswoman from Georgia, Rep. Nadine Harris, stood on the floor of the House with a printed copy of Aiyana's Oxford speech in her hand. She read from it directly, her voice reverberating across the chamber. If you only welcome genius in certain colors, it isn't genius you value, it's obedience. The room went quiet. Then applause broke out. C-SPAN aired the moment. Clips went viral. Other lawmakers issued statements of solidarity. Several HBCUs extended public invitations to Aiyana. One even offered her an honorary recognition award. But that wasn't the most powerful headline that week. The Oxford emails leaked next. An anonymous source released internal communications between Malcolm Penrose and two other faculty members. In one message, Malcolm explicitly referred to filtering out social engineering applicants and minimizing overrepresentation from emotionally charged demographics. Another read. I gave her the challenge because I wanted to see how long she'd chase her tail. It's like throwing a bone into a maze. The backlash was immediate. Oxford's administration launched another investigation. Public this time. Students held sit-ins. Alumni threatened to freeze donations. International students formed a solidarity group called Not Just Aiyana and posted their own stories of intellectual gaslighting. The world was watching. And now it wasn't just watching her. It was watching everything. Outside Marston Prep, protests swelled. Students walked out, holding signs that read, "Truth needs no permission. We are not your PR." Aiyana spoke. Now we shout. Parents complained. The board scrambled. And for the first time, Principal Aldridge looked visibly panicked during a morning announcement. The school's social media pages were flooded with comments. Even former students returned to the conversation, sharing years of overlooked bias and erasure. And through it all, Aiyana stayed grounded. She didn't lash out. She didn't gloat. She kept building. The archive grew to over 1,000 verified entries. The silent records were now a national digital museum of academic exclusion. Then, Oxford called again, but this time, not with an invitation, with an offer. A formal letter arrived by courier, hand-delivered in a blue envelope sealed with Oxford's crest. Aiyana sat at the kitchen table, her parents on either side of her. She opened it slowly. The letter was brief, polished, intentional. Miss Brooks, in light of recent events, and following the conclusion of our Ethics Committee inquiry, we wish to formally acknowledge the unjust practices exposed in your research and testimony. While we deeply regret the harm caused, we believe in restorative action. We are pleased to extend to you a full academic scholarship to the University of Oxford, including travel, housing, and mentorship. We only ask that, as part of this agreement, you refrain from public commentary regarding ongoing reviews and internal matters involving faculty or administrative decisions. This request is standard in academic transitions of this nature, and would not inhibit your academic freedom or personal growth. We believe your future is bright, and best protected with discretion. Sincerely, Oxford Office of Academic Affairs. The silence in the kitchen was thick. Her mother was the first to speak. So they're buying your silence. Her father read the letter twice before shaking his head. They want your mind, not your mouth. Aiyana stared at the page, unmoving. A full scholarship, a dream offer, and a leash. She closed the letter gently. Her heart didn't race. It ached. Because she saw the game now, clearer than ever. They didn't want to honor her. They wanted to absorb her, make her a quiet proof that the system worked. If she just stopped talking about how it didn't. Aiyana looked at her parents, then picked up the letter, folded it in half, and said quietly, "I didn't fight this hard to whisper." But even as she stood firm, she felt the chill of the cost ahead. The institutions knew how to smile and suffocate in the same breath. This wasn't the final offer. It was a test in new form. They offered her a full scholarship with one condition. She couldn't speak publicly again. The letter from Oxford lay on Aiyana's kitchen table, like a blade wrapped in velvet. The words "full academic scholarship" glowed with temptation. Travel, tuition, housing, mentorship. It was everything a young scholar could dream of. But the condition, silence about internal reviews and ongoing matters, clung to the offer as clearly as the crest on the envelope. It felt like a test, a trap disguised as reward. Her parents watched her quietly, her mother's lips pressed thin, her father's jaw tight. The room felt smaller than usual, the air heavier. Outside, dusk settled softly, the world holding its breath. Her father, Aiyana Brooks, exhaled slowly. "They want your mind, not your voice." Her mother, Patrice, reached across the table and placed her hand over Aiyana's. "This is more than a scholarship. It's a contract, one you didn't sign." Aiyana stared at the paper, at the crest, at the promise. Her heart didn't pound. It ached. The ache came from recognition of a pattern, of how power often rewards silence and punishes truth. She stood, folded the letter carefully, and looked at her parents. Quietly she said, "I didn't fight this hard to whisper." Her voice was soft, steady, no drama, just truth. The weight in the room lifted, but not completely. It didn't need to. Because in that moment, she had already chosen. The next morning, She drafted a response. Not with bitterness, not with anger, but with clarity. She thanked them for the scholarship offer, for the recognition, but declined. She wrote that her purpose wasn't personal gain. Her purpose was justice. Change. She explained that silence wasn't a sacrifice she could afford to make, not for herself, not for everyone who'd whispered their stories to her. She sent the email, hit send, and closed her laptop. Outside, dawn was breaking, pale light spilling into her room, casting long shadows across the floor. Then she did something she never expected. She announced the founding of a new institution, the Brooks Institute for Ethical Academia. It began as a post on social media, a photograph of her grandfather's old leather notebook, resting beside her typed statement. Title: When the System Fails, We Build New Ones. Within hours, messages poured in. Donations started trickling from strangers. Some recent college graduates, others even alumni from top universities, former students who had been silenced, dismissed, forgotten. Within days, small checks became larger wire transfers. Within a week, enough to rent a small office space in downtown New Orleans, a city with history, complexity, and a population hungry for change. Inside the new office, the walls were bare the first day. Pencil marks measured where dry erase boards would hang. A table held a laptop, a stack of notebooks, and Aiyana's grandfather's leather binder. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. She stood in the center of the empty room, hand on her grandfather's binder, looking out the window at the Mississippi River's distant roll. She thought of every student who had whispered to her, every stolen thesis, every silent rejection, every erased paper. Then she closed her eyes, took a breath, and whispered, "No more silence." Word spread quickly, not just among past victims, but among hopeful students, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, immigrant, low income, who had seen doors closed before they even knocked. They began reaching out. Some sent stories, some offered help, some just asked, "How do we join?" Within a month, the Brooks Institute had an email list of over 4,000 people, enough to demand something, enough to build momentum. She announced online meetings, virtual panels, ethical academia workshops, mentorship programs, a safe space for research, questions, disclosure, free from gatekeeping, prejudice, and silent sabotage. Students from Ivy League schools, community colleges, HBCUs, small liberal arts colleges, they all logged in, logged on, tuned in. And at the center was Aiyana, firm, unbowed, clear-voiced. She spoke at college panels, at virtual conferences, at community forums. Her voice echoed in spaces where it had never belonged, and now belonged. One evening, she sat on a stage at a packed auditorium, at a prestigious university. Lights overhead glinted off her glasses. The audience, nearly 1,000 people, waited in silence. She opened by reading a message from a student who'd been expelled for questioning a racist grading policy. Then another from a teacher of color who'd been reprimanded for calling out bias in a book list. Then a series of data-filled slides showing how challenges like Penrose's were disproportionately given to minority students, and how success rates were manipulated. Her closing line landed like thunder. "If excellence is only allowed when you stay silent, we haven't solved race, we just redesigned silence." The auditorium erupted in applause. Some cried. Others cheered. Several stood and raised fists. She stepped back, letting their energy wash around her. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She didn't dance. She just stood, solid, certain, present. Her life changed. Days blurred into a rhythm of advocacy, mentorship, community organizing, and press interviews. She spoke to student groups, community leaders, and even some educators who reached out, tentatively seeking guidance. Meanwhile, at Marston Prep, the administration tried to control the damage. They issued new statements, vague apologies, promises of review, diversity training, external audits, but no one believed them anymore. Their sponsors stayed away. Enrollment inquiries dropped. The PTA erupted. Parents held closed meetings behind guarded doors. It was content, not action. Structure, not sincerity. Then came the unexpected twist, the one that would shake everything again.
One morning, Aiyana received an anonymous package at the Institute's office. There was no return address. Inside was a small folder marked confidential. She opened it carefully. Inside, old student records from Marston Prep, transcripts, challenge files, email, dozens of folders dated over 15 years, all computer-generated challenges, each with the same structural oddities as the one she'd solved, each addressed to students from marginalized backgrounds. Black, Latinx, immigrant, low income, names changed, dates changed, but the files when opened had the same watermark from the defunct AI lab, the same hidden metadata, the same pattern.
She sat down, unease crawling up her spine. She flicked through pages. A Latin ex-student expelled after academic dishonesty. A South Asian girl, repeatedly denied entrance into the honor society. A black boy, whose science award was revoked, after plagiarism. All because they failed challenges no one could pass. All challenges with identical flaws, all sent exclusively to marginalized students. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was evidence. A trail of institutional sabotage stretching far beyond one tutor. Trembling, she looked up. She looked at the folder. She looked at her grandfather's binder lying on the shelf. Then she reached for her phone. She typed one word into the group chat she maintained with institute members. We expand. Because truth couldn't be confined to one school, one challenge, one generation. If the system was bigger, so would be the fight. Months later, the Brooks Institute was no longer a basement dream. It was a network, a coalition of students, alumni, teachers, journalists, lawyers, united by a common purpose. They published exposés, they helped file petitions, they organized webinars, they mentored research, they exposed not just one scandal, but a system built on silent sabotage. Universities across the country began audits. Some quietly removed faculty. Others launched public apologies. A few even revised their challenge protocols. News outlets covered the movement in op-eds. Think pieces. Documentary crews reached out. And through it all, Aiyana remained at the center. Still in school, still fighting, still refusing to be quiet. But even as her influence grew, she didn't lose her edge. She didn't soften. She didn't seek comfort. Because she knew now what many never learned. Power asks for silence. She gave it demand for truth instead. Her parents visited every weekend, helping with logistics, calls, storage, moral support. Their house had become something like a command center. Part home, part headquarters, part safe room. One evening, her grandfather came by, his shoulders stooped, but his eyes bright. He pulled her aside in the living room and handed her the leather notebook, the one he'd saved for decades. You built this on my old pain, he said quietly. But this is your fight now. She closed it gently. We're writing history. But even as the world watched and rallied, shadows lengthened. She had seen before how the system fought back, how it could rewrite, reframe, retaliate. She sensed the turning winds, and she knew deep down that they weren't done yet. Because institutions don't fall, they transform, they adapt, they regrow. And for every door they close, they build another wall. She lifted her chin, her voice soft but firm. We don't stop. An anonymous tip revealed that Malcolm had faked similar challenges before 2 students went missing from records. The dawn of reckoning came quietly, not with sirens or flashing lights, but with the slow, inexorable drip of truth spilling into daylight. Papers landed on desks, subpoenas were issued, and quiet halls of power at the University of Oxford began to buckle under pressure. The revelations from the archives of Brooks Institute for Ethical Academia, the leaked student records, metadata mismatches, identical flawed challenge files, sent over decades to underrepresented youth, could no longer be denied. Investigators pieced together a pattern: recycled academic tests, deliberate obfuscation of logic, systematic targeting of minority and low-income applicants. The veil of prestige was lifted. Within days, Oxford's board convened emergency meetings behind closed doors. Chairs were removed, professorships revoked, outreach programs suspended. Among the casualties was Dr. Malcolm Penrose, stripped of his title, escorted from campus quietly at dawn, his name erased from outreach rosters, his emails archived for review. The institution released a public statement acknowledging systemic failures in evaluation practices, and vowing comprehensive reforms in student assessment and diversity outreach. But the reckoning didn't end in Oxford alone. Universities across the United States and Europe, many with reputation-soaked programs and legacy admissions, suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Admissions offices, scholarship committees, graduate program boards, all re-examined. Some quietly purged questionable practices, others issued public apologies, launched audits, and rescinded old test-based admissions quotas that could no longer be defended. Meanwhile, Aiyana Brooks, the girl once mocked in corridors, once told to stay silent, was about to step onto the global stage. The summit came at a renowned international education conference in Geneva, convened to address equity, ethics and access in 21st century academia. She was asked to speak, not as a scandal subject, not as a token, but as a voice of change. When she walked to the podium, the room hushed. Delegates from colleges across 5 continents sat in silence. Cameras clicked, press lenses aligned. She took in a slow breath, glancing at her grandfather's battered leather notebook resting beside her, and began. She spoke not only with intellect, but with history, of her grandfather denied a degree, of countless others shut out silently, of the ideological weight behind merit and challenge. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't plead. She commanded. She laid out the archive, the data, the patterns with precision and passion. She ended with words that echoed across languages and borders. We were never asking for handouts. We're not asking for charity. We're demanding honesty. If you only welcome genius in certain colors, it isn't genius you value. It's obedience. Applause rippled through the hall. For a moment, time stood still. Then a cascade of standing ovations, cheers, and more than a few tears. It was more than validation. It was a reckoning. In the weeks that followed, major reforms began. Integrity councils were established. Independent audit boards formed. Admissions essays and interviews partially replaced logic puzzle challenges. Transparency committees demanded open records. And in the classrooms and lecture halls, the voices once silenced began to speak loudly, clearly, defiantly. The Brooks Institute, once a library of whispered testimonies, became a blueprint for academic reform worldwide. Universities adopted its charter. Students across continents registered for its mentorship and reporting programs. Reports of discrimination, bias, and opaque evaluation flooded in. Only now, many had a safe path to document and challenge them. Amid this surge, Aiyana wasn't just recognized, she was elevated. She was invited to chair a global ethics committee, to advise admissions reform in universities across Europe and North America, to teach, lead panels, mentor. Her life spun in a whirlwind of schedules, flights, calls, interviews. Her home became the nerve center of movement. Parents and students sought advice. Journalists tracked donations. Foundations pledged support. Her family tried to keep her grounded. Her mother cooked meals when she returned home weary. Her father made sure she slept. Her grandfather, once quiet, resigned, now sat beside her at conferences. He adjusted his glasses softly before every speech she gave. And when she looked at him, she saw not just him but every person whose voice had been erased before it began. Yet even as accolades rolled in, even as doors opened, a sense of vigilance settled around her. She had learned, systems don't crumble fully. They reform. Reform can be symbolic, easy to pass statutes, harder to change souls. She saw the urgency. She heard it in late-night calls, in whispers on new threads, in the messenger pings of frightened students who still feared retribution. Then came the unexpected twist, one that reminded her exactly why the fight had started, and why it could never end. Late one evening, as she reviewed security footage updates from a partner organization, auditing manipulation of exam records, her phone pinged. It was a new email, subject line, urgent, cross-check required. She opened it, scrolling past spreadsheets, legal logs, and date stamps. Then she stopped. The document attached had a header, Marston Preparatory, Student Archive 1994-2008. The file included records from hundreds of students long graduated, many of them untraceable now. But 2 names at the bottom sent a cold ripple down her spine. 2 gifted black students, seniors at Marston, in 1998 and 2002. Their final challenge files, filed as incomplete, their transcripts marked withheld, graduation revoked, their names erased, their photos removed from yearbooks. Alumni listings scrubbed. There was no record of degrees, no transcripts, no diplomas. They simply vanished. The implication was terrifying. Not just sabotage, systemic erasure. A pattern older and deeper than even she had uncovered. Her hands shook. Her heart hammered in her throat. She leaned back and closed her eyes. The weight of it wasn't just on her shoulders. It settled inside her chest, cold and heavy, yet alive. She whispered aloud, though no one was there but the empty office. This has to end. Months later, at a public conference in Toronto, where world educators gathered to set new academic standards, Aiyana stood again on stage. But this time, she wasn't just speaking, she was witnessing change. Universities pledged full transparency audits, scholarship gatekeeping mechanisms were abolished in favor of equitable review boards. Graduate school challenge-based entry was replaced by holistic portfolios. As she stepped down from the podium, eyes damp from emotion and purpose, a hush fell among the crowd. She closed the small black binder from her grandfather under one arm, the other swinging free. Her parents and grandfather were in the front row, pride etched deep in their faces. The movement she sparked had become structure, a new standard. Then a small hand pressed against hers. Looking down, she saw a young black girl, no more than 14, her eyes wide, hopeful, trembling. In her hand, a folded note. She handed it to Aiyana, with quiet reverence. That simple act carried more weight than any formal accolade.
Aiyana unfolded it slowly. The note read,
"What's next?" She paused. The world seemed to shift. All eyes in the hall turned on her. The cameras stopped flashing. The hum of conversation faded. The girl stepped back. Dozens of faces turned. Not angry, not hopeful, but expectant. Aiyana lifted her head. Her gaze swept the room. Her voice came quiet, but firm. "We fight," she said, "until the doors open for everyone." In that moment she understood. Justice was not a destination. It was a journey. A relay handed from one voice to another, and the girl's note was not a question. It was a baton, because once you answered history, you changed it. If you've ever been told to sit down when you were born to stand up, if you've watched someone rewrite the truth just because they feared your brilliance, then you already know this story isn't just hers. It's Type yes if you believe silence should never win. Subscribe if this broke your heart, but lit a fire.